I've never been the type to believe in the paranormal. I've always been the one in my group of friends who looks for the logical explanation. Wind through pipes, animals in the attic, old wood creaking under pressure. But there's something about the sound of whistling that still makes my skin crawl, even years after what happened at that house. It all started in the fall of 2019. I had just moved to a small town called Hawthorne Ridge, a quiet, tree-lined community surrounded by dense forest. I was renting a house at the edge of town, an older two-story place that backed right into the woods. It wasn't fancy, but it was cheap, and I liked the solitude. The first few days were normal, peaceful even. The leaves were changing. The air had that crisp wood smoke smell that only comes in late October. But on my fourth night there, I heard it for the first time. A whistling sound, faint, almost melodic, drifting through the trees behind the house. It was around midnight, and I was sitting in the living room with the TV off, just scrolling through my phone. The sound was distant, but clear. Someone was whistling an unfamiliar tune, slow, repetitive, deliberate. At first, I figured it was just someone passing by, maybe walking their dog late. But it kept going. Same rhythm, same notes. It lasted for nearly 5 minutes before fading away into the woods. I didn't think much of it until it happened again the next night. Same time, same direction, same tune. That second night, I decided to record it. I stepped out onto the back porch with my flashlight on, aiming it toward the tree line. The whistling stopped instantly. The moment my light hit the woods, it went completely silent. I waited. Nothing. Not even crickets. Then, from somewhere deep in the forest, I heard the sound again. Softer, slower, almost like someone was mocking me, imitating the same pattern, but just off enough to sound wrong. I went back inside, locked the door, and tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. The next few nights, nothing happened. But then, one evening when I got home from work, I found something that made my stomach drop. There were footprints, faint but visible, in the damp dirt near my back steps. Bare feet. Human. I checked the backyard fence, but there wasn't one. Just open woods stretching for miles. That night, the whistling came back. Only this time, it wasn't from the woods. It was right outside my window. I froze. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when the sound started. Slow and quiet, like someone standing inches from the glass. Whistle. Pause. Whistle. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart was pounding so hard I thought whoever was out there could hear it. After about 30 seconds, the sound drifted away again, back into the woods. The next morning, I went outside. There were handprints on the lower edge of my window, smudged, dirty prints, like someone had been leaning against it. I called the local sheriff, who came out and looked around. He said it was probably kids or drifters messing around, especially near Halloween. He told me to keep my doors locked and maybe get a camera system. So I did. I installed a cheap, motion-activated camera facing the woods. For 2 nights, nothing triggered it. Then, on the third, It went off around 12:17 a.m. When I checked the footage, it froze halfway through. The recording glitched, static filled the frame, but for half a second, I caught a blurry silhouette standing near the tree line. Too far to see details, but unmistakably human. And then, the whistling started again. Only this time, it wasn't just outside. It was inside the house. I heard it coming from downstairs. I grabbed my phone and crept to the staircase. The lights were off, but the faintest sound of whistling echoed from the living room. It was coming from near the back door. When I turned on the light, the sound stopped instantly. The air felt thick, heavy, and my breath came out in small clouds, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. On the door, written in something dark and smeared, were 3 words. Do you remember? I called the police again, but when they arrived, the writing was gone. Completely vanished. No residue, no stain, like it had never been there. That night, I packed a bag and left. I stayed at a friend's place in town for a week. When I finally went back to grab my things, the landlord told me something strange. He said the previous tenant, a man around my age, had broken his lease suddenly the year before, moved out after just a month. When I asked why, the landlord hesitated before saying, he said someone kept whistling outside his window every night. I never went back to that house, but every now and then, especially on cold October nights when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear that same tune. I grew up in a quiet, rural area in western Pennsylvania, a place where most houses sit a mile apart, and the nights get darker than you can imagine. It's the kind of countryside where you can hear coyotes, trains, and sometimes things that don't quite fit in either category. The story I'm about to tell happened in the fall of 2017. I was 16 and my best friend Eli was 17. We lived just a few miles apart, and we spent nearly every weekend exploring the back roads. Mostly just driving around, talking about life, sometimes getting into harmless trouble. That October, we had this habit of taking Eli's old pickup and driving into the fields after dark. There was this one long dirt road called Hendrickson Lane that stretched about 3 miles through cornfields and ended at a dead wooded trail. It was one of those places locals like to tell stories about, supposedly haunted or cursed, depending on who you asked. Of course, we didn't believe in any of that. We just liked the quiet. One Friday night, close to Halloween, we drove down there with snacks and a cheap flashlight, planning to hang out near the end of the road. The moon was bright enough to see without headlights, and the corn had already been harvested, leaving the fields bare and cold. When we got out of the truck, it was just us and the sound of the wind. It was one of those clear nights where every sound carried, the crunch of gravel, the distant bark of a dog, even the hum of power lines. We were only there for about 15 minutes before we heard something strange. It was the sound of footsteps, slow, heavy, and deliberate, coming from the trail that led into the woods. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer or someone else out walking, but the pattern was too rhythmic. One step, pause, another step. Eli shined the flashlight toward the sound, but it only reached the edge of the trees. Nothing. The footsteps stopped the moment the light hit. We both stood still for a few seconds, listening. Then from deeper in the woods came this faint whisper, so soft we couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely human. I'll never forget the way Eli looked at me then, that uneasy half grin that people get when they're trying not to admit they're scared. "Probably some guy hunting," he said. Except hunters don't whisper in the dark. We decided to get back in the truck just to be safe. But when Eli turned the ignition, the engine didn't start. It just sputtered and died. He tried again. Nothing. That's when we saw them. Two figures standing about 50 feet away, right at the edge of the road, both of them wearing dark clothing, one taller than the other, both motionless side by side. The flashlight beam was too weak to see their faces clearly, but I could tell they were both watching us. Eli shouted something like, "Hey, you guys need something!" No response. They just stood there. Then slowly, the taller one tilted his head to the side, unnaturally far, like he was studying us. That's when Eli's flashlight started to flicker and the smaller figure began walking towards us. Not running, just walking, steadily, straight down the road. We both panicked. Eli tried the engine again, and this time it roared to life. He floored it, tires spinning on the dirt, before we shot down the road, leaving the figures behind. Neither of us spoke for the next few minutes. When we finally reached the main highway, we pulled over at a gas station to catch our breath. The lights and noise felt unreal after what we'd just seen. I remember Eli looking at me and saying, "You saw them too, right?" I nodded. We sat there for a while before he finally got out to pump gas. That's when I checked my phone and saw that I had a new voicemail. It was from a blocked number. I played it on speaker. The message was only 10 seconds long. At first, just static, and then a faint voice whispering, "Why did you leave?" We went completely silent. Eli called his dad to come meet us, and we didn't go back down Hendrickson Lane again. A week later, we heard that someone had reported two strangers walking through backyards near that same area, but by the time police showed up, they were gone. That road has been closed off for years now. Farmers said the bridge at the end collapsed, but I've heard other people whisper different things, that the land's cursed or that the old trail doesn't lead anywhere anymore. Sometimes when I drive past that part of town on foggy nights, I swear I see shapes standing in the cornfields, motionless, side by side, watching. When I was 11, my parents often left me at my grandparents' house during school breaks. They lived in a quiet town called Cedar Hollow, tucked between the edge of a forest and a long, winding lake road. My grandparents' place was old, one of those creaky, wood-framed houses that seemed to breathe with the weather. The floors groaned, the windows whistled, and the basement always smelled like rain. But I loved it there. They had this big garden, a swing under the maple tree, and a long gravel driveway where I'd ride my bike for hours. The only thing that ever unsettled me about that house was the back hallway. It was narrow and dim, leading to the guest room, and it always felt colder than the rest of the house. My grandma said the insulation was just bad, but even at 11, I could tell there was something different about it. The story I'm about to tell happened one week in late October when the leaves were orange and the air smelled like wood smoke. My parents had gone on a short trip, and I was staying with Grandma and Grandpa for 5 days. The first couple of nights were completely normal. Board games after dinner, old movies, hot cocoa. But on the third night, things changed. I woke up around 2:30 in the morning to a soft knocking sound.
It wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from the back hallway where the guest room was. I sat up in bed listening. The knock came again. 3 soft taps. Then silence. I called out for Grandma, thinking maybe she was up. No answer. So I climbed out of bed and peeked down the hall. The air was noticeably colder there, like stepping into a different season. I reached for the light switch, but the bulb flickered and went out almost instantly. That's when I heard it, a soft humming sound, like someone quietly singing an old lullaby. "Grandma?" I whispered, but the voice wasn't hers. It was higher, younger. Then, from the dark guest room at the end of the hall, a small figure stepped out. It was a girl, around my age, maybe a bit younger, wearing a faded white nightdress that looked like it belonged in a different decade. Her hair was long, tangled, and her face was pale in the half-light from the window. She smiled faintly when she saw me. "You're awake," she said softly. "I didn't want to wake them." I froze. "Who are you?" She tilted her head, almost playfully. "You don't remember me?" I shook my head, heart pounding. "I'm your sister," she said. "Grandma said I could come see you." I stood there in silence, trying to process what she just said. I was an only child. I'd always been. She took a step closer, her bare feet silent on the wood floor. The air around her felt thick, colder with each breath I took. Then, from behind me, I heard my grandmother's voice. "Who are you talking to, honey?" I turned around. She was standing in her robe, blinking sleepily. When I looked back down the hall, the girl was gone. My grandmother must have seen my face, so she hurried over and held me. She told me I'd had a bad dream, but I know what I saw. The next morning I asked her about it. She looked nervous, then said quietly, "Your mother had a sister. She died when she was little. I thought you were too young to know." I remember sitting at the breakfast table, my cereal untouched, thinking about the girl's voice, about how familiar it had sounded. 2 days later, when my parents came to pick me up, Grandma pulled my mom aside. They talked in hushed tones near the porch. My mom's face went pale as she listened. That night, when we got home, she came into my room before bed and asked me something strange. "Did she say anything to you?" I nodded. "She said she was my sister." My mom's eyes filled with tears. She didn't say another word, just hugged me and told me not to talk about it again. Years have passed since then, but every October, around the same week, I have the same dream. I'm standing in that dark hallway, hearing soft humming from the guest room. Sometimes I wake up, and for a split second, I swear I see a small figure standing in my doorway, smiling faintly in the dark. And every time I hear her whisper, she didn't want to wake them.